Arthur stood on the balcony of his 40th floor penthouse, holding the promotion letter he'd spent a decade chasing. The paper was thick, the ink was sharp, and the title at the top was exactly what he'd visualized for years. But as he looked out over the city, he realized something unsettling. If he were to step off the ledge in this moment, his primary regret wouldn't be the loss of his life. It would be the fact that no one was there to watch him fall. The wind at that height is steady and cold, pulling at his shirt, but the physical discomfort was secondary to the silence. For 10 years, Arthur's internal engine had been powered by the observation of others.
Every late night at the office and every calculated social move was a bid for a specific reaction. Now, at the peak of his career, the feedback loop had stopped. Without an audience to confirm the value of the promotion, the achievement felt like it wasn't actually happening. This is the physical reality of a dopamine crash. When a supervisor nods in approval or a peer expresses envy, the brain's reward system flares. It's a sharp chemical spike, a hit of validation that functions exactly like a drug. Arthur is standing in the aftermath, the cold sweat, the elevated heart rate, and the heavy realization that the high has worn off, leaving him with nothing. We aren't looking at a simple character flaw or a case of burnout. This is a biological dependency.
Arthur hadn't just worked hard. He had outsourced his entire sense of existence to the people around him. He didn't have a core identity to fall back on, because he had never built one that didn't require a witness. To understand why a person becomes this hollow, we have to look at the original wiring. We have to go back to the moment the foundation was laid, to the quiet, high-stakes moments where a child first learns that attention isn't a given, but a prize for a flawless performance. The brain doesn't start out looking for applause. It starts out looking for safety. For a child, safety is found in the stillness of a parent's face.
If the face is tight, the world is dangerous. If it softens, the threat recedes. This is where the loop begins, not as a personality trait, but as a survival strategy. Children are remarkably efficient at monitoring their surroundings. They don't need to be taught. They just need to survive. They learn to track the tension in a jawline or the way a room's energy shifts when a door opens. You weren't learning how to value yourself back then. You were learning how to read the atmospheric pressure of someone else's expectations. Arthur remembers this vividly. He's 9 years old, sitting at a piano during a recital. He doesn't really hear the music he's playing. His entire nervous system is tuned to a man in the third row, his father. Arthur wasn't playing for the art. He was playing for the absence of a critique. When the final note faded and his father gave a single, brief nod, Arthur felt a sharp hit of dopamine. It wasn't the glow of achievement. It was the relief of a target being missed. This is how the infection settles in. You stop being a person and start being a mirror. Your identity becomes a secondary concern to your ability to reflect what people want to see. But there's a cost to building yourself in the reflection of others. You only exist as long as they are watching. This wiring doesn't disappear when you leave home. It follows you into your career, sitting quietly in your office and waiting for a superior to speak. High-stakes environments, this desperate need for a witness creates a specific kind of vulnerability, a phenomenon we call the seeker's mark. Arthur sat across from the board, his suit perfectly tailored, looking every bit the executive. On the surface, he was winning the room. But if you looked at his mechanics, he was unraveling. He was displaying the physical tells of the seeker's mark. It starts with the micro-nod. You see it in offices and coffee shops everywhere. A person finishes a sentence and their chin gives a tiny, involuntary jerk. It's a subconscious question. Are you still with me? Then there's the eye check. Sentence, Arthur's gaze would flicker to the CEO, searching for a dilating pupil or a slight softening of the jaw. He wasn't anchored in his own presentation. He was monitoring the room for permission to continue. The superior, a man who understood how to use silence as a weapon, spotted these cues immediately. He didn't give Arthur the validation he was fishing for. Instead, he just sat there, unmoving. This is a standard way to dismantle someone who lives for approval. By withholding the expected reaction, you force the seeker to over-explain.
Arthur started to stumble, adding unnecessary details and eventually compromising his own data just to kill the quiet. He was handing over his leverage because he couldn't handle 3 seconds of neutral silence. He was so busy trying to be the right version of himself that he effectively disappeared from the conversation. He walked out of that room with the promotion, but he felt hollow. He had secured the title, but the process had cost him his autonomy. He was beginning to understand that professional success is a very small comfort when you've become a passenger in your own life. Arthur had reached the goal, but the weight of maintaining the mask was starting to become physical. He was about to hit a wall, not because he failed, but because he had finally succeeded at being someone else. Think about what happens to a personality when you strip away the observer. If you were the last person on the planet, the promotion letter in your pocket would lose its value instantly.
You wouldn't suck in your stomach or check the angle of your jaw in a window. Without an audience, most of what we call an identity simply stops functioning. It's a set of behaviors that requires a witness to exist. Arthur felt this truth strike him in the executive washroom minutes after his big win. He leaned over the sink and looked at his reflection, trying to find his own neutral face, just a normal, resting expression that wasn't meant to convey confidence or competence. He couldn't do it. Every time he tried to relax his features, he'd subconsciously adjust his brow to look thoughtful or tighten his mouth to look decisive. Even in a locked room, he was still performing for a ghost. He realized he didn't have a default setting anymore. He was a collection of responses tailored to other people's expectations, a series of calculated gestures that had eventually replaced his actual self. This is the reality of the seeker's psyche. When you peel back the layers of the high achiever or the reliable friend, you don't always find a person underneath. Often you find a void where a human being should be. The personality has become a survival mechanism designed to prevent rejection and nothing more. If you look at your own life and see that same calculated performance, you're the person we work with at SMA for Windows. We aren't here for self-discovery or motivational coaching. We are here to analyze the clinical death of the individual. Because once the approval seeking reaches this stage, minor adjustments won't work.
To get your life back, you have to be willing to do something most people find terrifying. You have to be willing to commit social suicide. Arthur arrived at the Monday morning briefing to do exactly that. Usually, he'd be the first one in the room, sitting upright and ready to mirror the CEO's energy to prove he was on the team. This time, he just sat. He didn't offer the usual eager nod or the helpful tilt of the head. He was there to run a test, a small, intentional failure, a calculated act of social suicide. He had left a clear mistake in the second paragraph of his report. In his old life, a typo like that would have felt like a physical wound. Now, it was a diagnostic tool.
When the CFO pointed it out with a dry, dismissive remark, Arthur didn't scramble. He didn't apologize or offer to stay late to fix it. He just acknowledged the comment and waited. He felt the sting, that tight, uncomfortable sensation in the chest that comes with social rejection. It's a physical withdrawal. Most people spend their lives sprinting away from that feeling, using people-pleasing as a shield to make the burning stop. But Arthur stayed still. He watched the CFO's irritation as if it were a weather report, something happening in the room, but not to him. He was shifting his focus from, what do they think of me, to, what am I observing right now? This process isn't about building confidence. It's about letting a specific part of yourself go.
It feels like a slow death because the social self, that polished version of you built for other people, is being denied its only fuel. When you stop feeding it approval, it begins to fade. You aren't finding yourself in this moment. You're simply letting the person everyone else expected you to be disappear. By the time the meeting wrapped up, the atmosphere had shifted. Arthur wasn't the reliable guy anymore. He had become something harder for them to categorize. He was becoming autonomous. If you saw him walking to his car that evening, you'd notice the change. The way he moves has lost its performative edge. He looks less like a man trying to be seen, and more like a ghost passing through. Later that night, Arthur is back on the 40th floor balcony.
The wind is still biting, but the scotch tastes different now. It isn't a prop for a celebration he hopes someone will notice. It's just a drink. The promotion letter, the one he spent 10 years chasing, is in the trash can inside. He didn't throw it away in a fit of rage. He just realized it was a piece of paper that had no power to change his internal temperature. This is the ghost state. It's the practical result of the social suicide we've been discussing. When you stop reacting to the micronods, the tactical silences, and the judgmental shifts in a room, you become unswayable. You are present, you are functional, but you are no longer a target. To a manipulator, a person who doesn't seek validation is invisible.
There's no handle to grab, and no way to pull you into their orbit. You've simply removed the interface they use to control you. But don't mistake this for a victory lap. People won't like this version of you. They will call you cold or difficult to read. What they actually mean is that you are no longer a mirror reflecting what they want to see. You will be invited to fewer things. The frantic energy of your social circle will quiet down as they realize you are no longer feeding the cycle. It is a heavy, silent way to live. But as Arthur looks out over the city lights, he isn't searching for a reflection in the glass. He's just looking at the city.
He is alone with himself, and for the first time, that isn't a problem to be solved. You will be less popular. You will be overlooked, but you will finally be real.